Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed at Hipmix 88.9 WEIU.
Welcome to the Tales of Music and Film podcast. I am DJ Apollo, and I cannot hold my excitement right now because this is an episode that I have been waiting weeks to do. And I have my best friend, Jonathan, on the podcast here today. Now, this guy has been my best friend since I was born. He's only older than me by 3 months, so we've known each other our whole lives. And I knew when I was getting this show started that we had to do an episode together. And I came out with an idea about a few months ago that the movie that we would cover is the very first Godzilla movie from 1954. Now, the Godzilla franchise is said to be one of the biggest franchises of all time, with around 36 films and counting. And Jonathan, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. And I can't believe we're doing this right now. You know what I mean?
I'm very excited to finally be able to get to do this because we've been talking about it for a while. And I mean, and like you mentioned, literally, best friends for life. And you said since you were born, and that is literally true because I think it was literally the next day my mom took me to come see you at the hospital. So literally from the day you were born, we have known each other. So
yeah, I know. It's so crazy to me. And because his little sister's having a son in February, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so just crazy. So, Jonathan, where should we start with this movie?
Well, first things first, I wanted to ask your view as I know, casual kind of, because I think you've seen some of the movies, right?
Yeah, so a little history about my Godzilla experience. Jonathan is the one who got me into the movies, obviously, and we actually went to go see So a brand new trilogy was just made about a couple years ago. We had the 2014 Godzilla, which he had me watch. That was my very first Godzilla film. Then we went to the theater in 2019.
Actually, a quick interjection. I've just unlocked a memory. Didn't I show you a Godzilla movie? I think it was Godzilla versus Destroya when we were pretty young, 12, 13.
Oh,
there was
yeah.
red creature with kind of the alien mouth that came out, and there was this whole scene where the police were fighting him and everything. You have memories of that?
Oh, yeah. You're right, actually. So
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, so that happened. So yeah, he showed me a couple of movies when we were kids. I forgot about that. I think they were in the 80s ones.
Yeah, that was the Heisei era, which was the 80s period of Godzilla movies.
Yeah, and I remember there was a Godzilla cartoon we watched too. That ran for a while.
You had completely forgot about that. We at your house. It was the box CRTV computer, super old school, and it was on YouTube. They had full episodes of Godzilla the series, which were the sequel to the 1998 Godzilla film by Roland Emmerich, the director of Independence Day.
Uh-huh.
That was the first American movie of Godzilla, and then that was the TV show. I completely forgot. We watched that. We went through all the episodes and watched them on YouTube. Had a good time.
Oh yeah, dude, good times. And so we watched all of that, and then he ended up showing me the 2014 Godzilla, and then we went to the theater to go see King of Monsters in 2019, and I consider that to be my favorite Godzilla movie. I really liked what that movie did with its characters and what the stakes were and the effects and everything. I thought it was really good. And then there was a spin-off called Kong Skull Island, which leads into Godzilla versus King Kong as the third installment. And funny enough, I was literally talking with a couple of friends of mine today about this movie, and we thought it was extremely disappointing, to be honest, because it's literally Dawn of Justice, Batman versus Superman, but with monsters, where it's they fight for 5 minutes and then they team up to take care of this random threat.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't too pleased with that one. But King of Monsters, though, is my favorite. So my concept when it comes to a Godzilla movie is you have a group of characters trying to survive while he's destroying the city, fighting some other threat. And that's the general premise that I get from the ones that I've seen. Yeah. But clearly there's a lot more to it than that. I just didn't really notice with my young eyes.
Yeah.
So what is it really?
So like a general overview, just talking about the Godzilla series as in general, the most like common knowledge that people have, and I mean, there's lots of different ways you can like view it. But as you said before, Godzilla is a huge franchise. It actually has the Guinness World Record for the longest running movie franchise of all time. I think Marvel will overtake that at some point because Marvel literally, has like 4 movies every year, like ridiculous. They're catching up quick. But for now, at the time of recording this, Godzilla is still the Guinness Book World Record holder. There's 36 films, 3 TV shows, and I mean countless comics, and in Japan, manga, games, just so much spin-off material, like toys. It is such a huge franchise. And even if you have never seen a Godzilla movie in your life, I guarantee you probably every person that listens to this has heard of Godzilla. He is an iconic character in fiction and just in general movie knowledge. Like, you've heard of Godzilla. He's parodied in like so many movies. He is just so iconic. But a lot of people don't know the origins of what came about to make Godzilla. Like, what was the process behind the creation of the very first movie? What is the themes of Godzilla? Because that's, as you said, most people's impression is giant lizard breathes fire, fights other giant monster, while there's some human side story that we don't really care about. We actually want to just get to the monster action. Stuff. But so some backstory. We'll be talking about the very first Godzilla movie, which is Godzilla, the Japanese title, in 1954. We will not be talking about the 1956 Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is the one most people think of. It is the edited American version. So America re-edited it, and Raymond Burr, famous actor for the time, they kind of cut him into the movie. So they had like body doubles of the Japanese actors, and you would only see them from the back of their head, because they didn't have the technology at the time to like edit their face or anything like that. And they would make it look like he was a part of the plot and kind of just shove him in, and through editing make him a part of the movie, which he never was. And they cut out a lot of the important themes, like the thing that made the movie. They cut a lot of that out. So a lot of Americans, that's the only version they've seen. So they don't know a lot about the original version and the original intentions. So to go over some of the facts about the movie, came out October 27th, 1954. Nominated for 2 Japanese Film Technique Awards. It won Best Film Special Effects for the year. It lost Best Picture to Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai.
Okay.
Which, I don't know if you've heard of that, but have you heard of The Magnificent Seven?
Oh,
the Western
of course
movie?
I have.
It is directly based off of Seven Samurai. So literally in the opening credits for The Magnificent Seven, if you look, it says based off of Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai.
Okay.
So Akira Kurosawa, if you're like a film buff, is actually very well known. He is an extremely famous director, famous Japanese director. He's made like tons and tons of movies, won tons and tons of awards. He's very, very famous. So it's understandable why Godzilla didn't win. It just kind of got unlucky that his best film got released that year, so they kind of lost the best film award for that year. But anyway, also, side note, Kurosawa actually said that Godzilla is one of his favorite films. He topped it in one of his favorite lists. So he actually acknowledged that he really liked Godzilla as a film. So, other facts about it. During its initial run, it had the opening record for the highest first-day ticket sales in Tokyo. And it went to sell 9.69 million tickets.
I gotta say though, for the 50s, like that's big record numbers,
especially for that time. And this is right after World War II, like in Japan. This is like post World War II, so those are still like very, very big numbers for the time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what's funny is before it was released, a lot of critics and stuff were saying it was gonna bomb. They were calling it bad, saying it wasn't going to do well, and obviously they were kind of wrong about that.
Dude, like, what is it with that happening? It's just like, another side note, him and I are huge Star Wars fans, and like, I didn't know this, but he just told me like last year that everybody thought that New Hope was going to bomb.
Yeah.
You know? And like everybody said that Jaws was going to bomb. It's just like all these huge milestones in film history. Everybody, we're all like, it's gonna fail. Then it ends up doing way better than it was ever planned to. You know, like just crazy.
So also, if you are kind of a monster movie buff and stuff like that, there's a term called tokusatsu, which means a suitimation. So it is literally the special effects art of having a guy in a suit, putting him on a set, and usually they slow down the footage. So usually when you see him lumbering around, when you actually see the behind the scenes of the filming, they're moving at normal speed, but they just slow down the film to create the effect of them kind of being lumbering, slow-moving monsters. So this was the movie that kind of founded that technique. So the funny thing about this was when they were planning on making this movie, they wanted it to be stop motion. So because a lot of monster movies of the time that were coming out, if you've ever heard of Ray Harryhausen, he made a very famous, like lots of different movies with stop motion monsters, and they wanted to replicate that, but at the time it would have been way, way too expensive for the actual studio, Toho Studios, since, you know, they weren't really that big. Japanese films weren't really that big, so they didn't have the budget for it or the time. They said it would have taken 7 years with the budget they had to create the movie completely in stop motion. So they actually made the brand new special effects, which for them was the cheap way of doing things, but became the standard for years to come of suitimation and using a guy in a suit. Obviously, it was rough because the actual making of the suit was they had to make it like 3 times. The first 2 times, they just had to completely scrap it, couldn't even use it. And the actor who was in the suit would pass out from heat exhaustion after 2 minutes of filming. So he would literally be in the suit filming. 2 minutes later, the guy literally falls over and passes out. This is the kind of like jank stuff they were working with.
Because it's just like everybody assumes like, oh man, I bet it was so much fun being the actor that got to destroy like the fake city.
Yeah.
And then I kind of find out the dude was literally passing out after like just 2 minutes of wearing that suit. It's just like, yeah, it's not as fun as you would think.
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
not all fun and games. It was kind of like this guy could have literally died making this.
Do you know what the suit was made out of? Like what it was?
Granite. I think not like actual granite of like rock, but I think it was a combination of that and like latex and stuff like that. It was like several layers of stuff. And so at the time they didn't think like, oh, we need to make like ventilation, because a lot of things with suits you see in Hollywood, they'll have like small fans and a lot of like air holes. They didn't really have that. Right. So he was just closed up in this enclosed space with like 3 feet of just material between him and the outside. So he's literally almost like suffocating in this suit. Just like terrible conditions. Like I would never in a million years want them to do that.
That's like the equivalent of wearing a NASA spacesuit without the oxygen pack attached to it.
Exactly.
You know? It's just like, what are you expecting? It's just, wow.
Like
crazy.
If you're claustrophobic, like literally your worst nightmare.
Your worst nightmare.
And so, I mean, just going over the cultural impact again, like you cannot understate like how famous and popular it is. Like, for instance, Steven Spielberg used to watch Godzilla all the time and grew up watching Godzilla, and that's why he said, like, especially with the second Jurassic Park movie, there's a scene of, you know, the dinosaur running through like downtown and destroying stuff. That was his homage to Godzilla. He literally did that to give credit to Godzilla, and he said that was kind of the movie he always wanted to make. Ever since he was a little kid, he wanted to make a Godzilla movie. So that was like his version of doing that. So even like, and Steven Spielberg is, you know, one of our most hailed and popular directors, and he was very, very much inspired by that. And then we go talk about Star Wars with George Lucas. I'm sure you remember Clone Wars episode, the Zillo Beast, direct comparison to Godzilla. They literally like redid the Godzilla plot in Star Wars.
Like, I'll never forget. So him and I grew up watching Star Wars: The Clone Wars. It aired from 2009 to around 2014. It ran for about 6 full seasons altogether. And literally in season 2, there is a 2-3 episode plot or arc about about this Zillo Beast monster, and they bring it back to Coruscant, which is the equivalent of like New York City
Or Tokyo.
Yeah. And Star Wars, and the beast gets loose. I'll never forget when you and I were watching that episode, I literally turned to you and I'm like, they just need to add the Godzilla theme in the background. It's literally Godzilla.
Yeah.
You know, like, so I'm not surprised one bit that was influenced by that. You know? Because I was wondering, are they referencing that, or was just an accidental like?
Oh, it was definitely like direct comparison, because even from its design, it has like a few spines and stuff, which is very Godzilla-like. I remember having the DVD for the Clone Wars Season 2, and they had on the cover of like the art book that came with the DVD they had Arabic, which is the Star Wars language, like the letters, and they specifically made it look like Japanese in style, and
I remember that,
and it literally had like a Godzilla pose of him being on the building and everything, and even from how they find the Zillo Beast, which is awakening him through like seismic testing for fuel, and he's like underground, which is very much how Godzilla. They usually somehow humanity disturbs something, wakes him up, and then it goes on a rampage. But moving on from that, so we've gone random facts and tidbits about Godzilla and his cultural influence. Actually, going back to the first movie, I'm going to do some setup talking about what led to the creation of Godzilla and why it's so famous, especially in Japanese culture, and why it's so influential in Japanese culture. So obviously, during World War II, there was the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and I don't remember, I have it written down, but I can't remember which bomb is which, but one of them was 129,000 people were killed, and with the other one, 226,000 people were killed. So huge loss of life. Like the biggest, in the shortest amount of time, the biggest loss of life like ever. The only time nukes have been used in warfare. And obviously the Japanese people were completely devastated by this attack, and it haunted them for years and years to come. They were broken as a country. America stepped in and was like kind of took over and led them along new paths of regrouping and everything. So obviously that was a huge part of the Japanese culture and like what happened in that time period. So then after that, there was a incident. Let me see if I can check the year here. Also, another fact about this was the U.S. had a sort of gag order on Japanese media that they could not portray America as bad or talk about the nukes in a bad light, because it's kind of like typical 101 of how you do things. You don't want your country to look bad, so even though we bombed them and killed however many people, they made it so they couldn't basically feed bad press so that the American people would be like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have done that. So in movies and stuff, for a while, they were not allowed to show America in a bad light and talk about nukes in a bad light unless you were like independent. So Toho was an independent studio, so they could kind of do whatever they wanted to an extent. But the next incident that really influenced the making of the movie, there was a ship called the Daigo Fukuyar Maru, or Lucky Dragon number 5, which was a Japanese tuna fishing boat. It had a crew of 23 men, and they were out fishing one day, and they were outside of this zone. So unbeknownst to them, America was using a nuke for testing. So let me see if I can check the date here. They were using a thermonuclear weapon on Bikini Atoll on March 1st, 1954. And the Lucky Dragon number 5 was fishing outside of the danger zone. So they were outside of where they were in a safe space, supposedly. They were outside of the testing zone. They should have been completely fine. But the bomb was twice as powerful as the government was predicting. So it had a much larger fallout. So the safe zone wasn't entirely accurate. So as the men were fishing, they started to notice this like ash, this dust that completely covered them, completely covered the waves, and they had no idea what it was because they weren't informed of the testing. They didn't go far enough that there would have been like patrol boats telling them, hey, you need to get out of here, go back. So they were just fishing, thinking everything was normal. All this ash and stuff starts falling on them. They don't know what it is. They literally start picking it up. One of them actually like tasted it, put it in his mouth. Some of them put it in a bag. And so all of this material is from the fallout, extremely radioactive. So they have this like radioactive dust covering them. It's everywhere. It's infecting the fish. They don't realize this. So next day, they start having extremely bad symptoms like vomiting and red of the eyes and mucus and like all this stuff because they have radiation poisoning and they don't even realize it.
They don't even realize it.
So then once they get back to port, they are like quarantined and they have doctors test them and they eventually figure out that this is radioactive material and they have radioactive sickness. So there was a huge uproar over this. It was a big issue because this is, let me see how many years after. I think it's about 9 years after World War II and the bombing. So this is very fresh in everyone's memory. So they just moved on from that tragedy, and then this next thing's come out where, are obviously unintentional, but the U.S. has now poisoned all these other 23 men. And so there was riots over it. There was Japanese people going out in the streets. And eventually there was a letter that was signed by several different citizens. It was an anti-nuclear petition. And it eventually gained 30 million signatures from the Japanese people. So this was nationwide. People were signing this and talking about this of no nuclear testings or anything. That was just anti-nuclear. It was just they were very much affected by this and wanted their voice to be heard. So this is a political climate just setting up. This is what was happening at that time.
Yeah, because like the thing is though, it's like I've kind of realized in the last year, it's like movies they always take inspiration for something. It's like, what was it that led to the idea, what if this happened?
Yeah.
You know, like every movie you've ever watched, it all came from something that it took a reference from.
Yeah.
It could be something from the past, something political. It's like it's open season on whatever the topic might be. And in this instance, it was this whole situation where the U.S. said that these bombings were safe. They're just tests, but you weren't clear about the quarantine area, and 23 of our citizens are now poisoned and dying.
Yep.
And, like, what do you think? You think you're just going to sit here and just be like, oh, whatever?
Oh,
like,
that's too
no,
bad.
Like, no, that's too bad. Like, no, there's going to be an uproar. People are going to they're going to put their foot down and go, like, we've had enough
Yeah.
with this. You know, like, you bombed us 9 years ago, and we still remember all that. It's still fresh in all of our minds. And then this happens.
Yep.
Like, you can only push someone so far before they snap.
Yeah.
They can't take it anymore.
And that's a big thing with like media, and it's always influenced by real life in some way.
In some
I
way.
mean, a lot of movies and stuff will make direct, I wouldn't say parodies, but they take an event that happened and basically just commentate on it or just do that in a fictional way. And this is kind of that version of it because literally the opening scene of Godzilla is these guys on a Japanese fishing boat, and they're just sailing out in the middle of the ocean, and they see this like bright light, and their ship sinks, and eventually they're found later, and they all have radiation poisoning. It's because Godzilla awoke and destroyed their ship, but it is literally they recreated what happened with the Lucky Dragon just in the opening scene. So like, if you don't know that, you wouldn't realize it, but if you do your research and do it, it's literally just like they recreated reality and just put that in the opening scene, setting the stage for their kind of anti-nuclear message.
Yeah, exactly. But thinking about that, though, it's like, what an opening. You know, can you imagine, like, you're going into this not knowing what to expect, and it opens up with that.
Yeah.
You know, like, as the first thing, it's like, it's not, like, dude, I just think about this, though, for the 50s, that is, like, dark opening for a 50s movie.
When they were not really allowed to have a lot of dark things in movies, especially for the time.
Yeah, it's just like, it's just crazy, you know, for that time era to have the guts to do that. You know what I mean? Like, just crazy. And so continue.
Well, and even like what you were saying, like having a direct comparison, just to view like how serious the opening of the movie would be. Think of like right after 9/11, if there was like an opening of a movie and it was two towers being destroyed by a plane crashing into them. That's
the same kind
that
of
is the
scale.
level of comparison they were doing with the
Yeah.
opening of this movie. And so the rest of the movie is also very heavy-handed with this message of man's kind of folly and man thinking that they have control over nature. And this is a theme that goes throughout the franchise. It kind of loses its more anti-nuclear message and the tragedy of what happened to the Japanese people and becomes more of man thinks they have control over nature. But that is a major theme in this movie as well.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so throughout the movie, obviously, you know, Godzilla awakens. Oh, also, fun fact, with Gojira, when they were thinking of the design for this creature, they came up with, they wanted to combine basically kind of a gorilla and a whale. And so the Japanese words, I'm going to butcher them, so I'm not going to do it, is basically it's combining, Gojira is a combination of the kanji for gorilla and whale. So Gojira.
Gotcha.
So they literally
Okay.
just fused those two words together, and that's what Gojira means. So it's
Okay.
gorilla whale, basically.
So that's where the name came from.
Yeah.
Okay, that's so crazy to me.
And
Wow.
every Japanese Godzilla movie, if you watch it, that is his name, Gojira.
Gojira.
But every version you watch of America, it's lost in translation. They changed the name to Godzilla, for
Godzilla,
American
for American
audiences.
audiences.
Yeah. And so for the rest of the movie is obviously, you know, Godzilla awakens and there's a scientist who finds out about him and is trying to convince the government that he exists and that they need to do something about it. And eventually he actually goes to Tokyo, starts to destroy Tokyo, and you see this like city burning in flames, and you see I think there's, if I remember right, actual scenes of like you see some guys like running and they're on fire and stuff, and so it's very evocative of the nuclear, what happened during World War II.
Oh yeah.
So if you plant yourself, you're a Japanese person watching this right after that happened, it's kind of almost like triggering PTSD.
Oh yeah.
Like
yeah.
that is what they were trying to convey, was Godzilla was the embodiment of the nuke. So he was a peaceful creature living at the bottom of the ocean, and America tested nukes and it awakened him and caused him to like absorb the energy. And that's when his iconic, everyone kind of confuses it for just being fire, but nuclear breath, which is, you know, the Godzilla shooting the beam,
Yeah.
that is nuclear breath.
Oh yeah, that's the famous blue flame coming
Yeah.
out of his mouth. Like literally every promotional poster for King of Monsters, almost all of them had him doing that particular pose.
Very, very iconic.
Very iconic. Yeah.
Definitely. And so he was kind of the embodiment of nuclear, like, craze and fear and everything. That was what he was. That's what they wanted him to embody. And so after him finally coming to shore and destroying several cities and everything, there's a whole side plot and everything, but there's this doctor, which, or a scientist, I should say, Dr. Serizawa. And so he's kind of a basement dweller, and he's doing all these tests and everything, and he's created this thing called the oxygen destroyer.
Yeah, you see, I'm glad you mentioned this because I actually watched a review for this movie a couple years ago, and the guy brought that up, and I remember he showed some of the scenes, like, he didn't want the world to know about this, right? He was keeping it hidden because, like, imagine if this gets in the wrong hands kind of thing. So he was very like, do I want to tell people about this? You know?
Yeah.
Doesn't he, like, show it to one of the characters or something?
Yeah, so he has a fiancée.
Oh, okay,
and so
okay.
she doesn't know a lot about his work, and one day, like, after Godzilla kind of appears, he shows her this work, and he's like, I can never allow this to fall in the wrong hands, which forces if humans, if humans can get their hands on something, they'll somehow mess it up and use it to kill other people. And that's just how humans work. We mess things up over and over again, and it's the folly of man. We think we can just control everything, and we end up messing it up somehow.
Oh yeah, I do that. If you look back at human history, especially the 20th century, it's the same thing over and over again.
Yep. We just repeat. I mean, the famous quote of history is, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, like literally.
Or like, oh, well, I didn't really pay attention during history, so I think this is a great idea. We should do that. And you figure out like 5 other countries tried that and it didn't work.
It didn't work. Yeah.
But with Dr. Serizawa, again, another like direct comparison to the real world is he's kind of based off of Robert Oppenheimer, which was one of the people, he was the head of the group that created the atomic bomb.
Okay.
And he completely regretted it after what he saw what it was used for. So he is very famously quoted. I have like 2 quotes here. We waited until after the blast had passed. This is them. They tested it first. After the blast had passed, people walked out of the shelter, and then it was entirely solemn. We knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed. A few people cried. Most people were silent. And then another quote is, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Oh, dude, I think I actually watched him say that.
Yep. Very famous.
From a recording once. Like, dude, I feel so bad for him. Can you imagine? It's like you create this thing and it's used to vaporize and wipe out how many people?
Hundreds of thousands of people, which also, big fact, mostly civilians. There was not a lot of military bases. This was dropped in the middle of the city, and just hundreds of thousands of civilians vaporized in an instant. And so he was a scientist. Scientists want to advance humanity. And usually, I'm not like speaking for every scientist that's ever existed, they usually want to do right by humanity and help humanity.
Yeah.
So when you see your creation used for mass destruction and death, I think that would definitely kind of tear you apart inside and realize I did this. Like, I am responsible for this happening.
Yeah, exactly. And I love how they intertwined that with the plot of this, with the guy who invented that. What was it called again?
The oxygen destroyer.
Yeah. Like, I just think it's so cool how they took that and they influenced it into this story. That's so fascinating.
So, and it's literally like they just made him and then turned him into a fictional character. And obviously the plot and everything is not the same as him, but they tried to recreate that as best as they could.
Yeah, and I gotta say this, I gotta respect them for how well they handled the source material they were basing this off of. You know what I mean? It's like they took very good care in making sure that people knew about these events.
Yeah, it's very much a product of its time.
Literally, it's literally a time capsule for that particular time of its release.
Like all of how the Japanese felt about World War II and after the nukes, and how Japan was kind of in a state of limbo. There was a few years later, in like the 70s, there was an economic boom where Japan like skyrocketed and they were making money left and right. There were so many technological advancements, but this is before that. So Japan did have a huge boost at a later point. But this was at a kind of a time of limbo where, like, right after World War II, they're like, where do we go from here? They were defeated. They lost the war. So many people died. It's like, where do we go from here? And Gojira is like you said, a time capsule of how they felt at that time and kind of their feelings of that situation and everything that happened. And I think it's super interesting because you just have, like we've talked about, this preconception of Godzilla's just a big lizard, fights things, and ooh, he's cool lizard. And to be fair, about 99.9% of his movies after this is just that. There's not a lot of deep meaning or anything, but the first movie definitely has a lot of meaning and is very deep in its messages. Because literally, the movie right after this, Godzilla Raids Again, they made in 6 months. So they did not expect this to be as a huge success as it was. So they literally just kind of scrapped together a plot which where it started. Another monster shows up, Anguirus, and he has to fight the monster. So, and that started the ball rolling of what Godzilla would be after that. So they almost immediately, like everyone says nowadays that companies are just like cash grab and make sequels. You're not going to see them make a movie in 6 months, write it, film it, effects. They like scrap this movie together so fast. They're like, we got to get that money, that cash cow. We got to get that money.
Exactly. I just think it's so funny. Literally 6 months later, and we got a sequel. Like they knew, like the minute they saw that money coming in, oh my gosh, we can't.
Gotta make another one.
This can't be a one-time thing. We gotta get another one in there.
Keep it going, keep it going, and then it would go for the next 70 years, and here we are, and they're still making them.
They're still making them. Yeah.
But yeah, going back to Dr. Serizawa, he was kind of the emotional center for the movie, and like the big climax of the movie is because through the fiance, because she breaks up with him and she has a new fiance. Mm-hmm. She tells him about his work, and the government eventually finds out about it because he's a soldier and he works for the government, and so they kind of forced him to use it to kill Godzilla because everything they're using doesn't work. They've tried using everything. Nothing they throw at this thing will kill it.
Yeah, and I gotta be honest. So to take a little detour here for a minute, I actually watched a couple of scenes of him walking through the obvious fake city, of course.
Yeah.
But dude, I'm telling you right now, the suit effects and when he's tearing down like the power lines and like the fake buildings, dude, for the 50s, it actually holds up pretty well, I think.
Definitely.
You know? And I'm glad they didn't show the costume like up close.
Mm-hmm.
Like the shots of him being like, like the camera here and he's like right here.
Yeah.
When he's like farther away, it looks pretty darn good.
I think they did a good job, and especially with like lighting and stuff, because most of the scenes he's in, it's all night. So he's kind of covered in darkness, and you see him light up with the flames, and when he's shooting his atomic breath and stuff like that. So I think they did a good job of not just, here he is, here's a big spotlight shining on him, and you can see him all the time. I think they did a good job of hiding him in the shadows a lot of the time, which is good just monster movie filmmaking.
Yeah.
It's like Alien is a prime example of, don't show the entire creature because that kind of spoils it.
Yeah, like the less you see him, the better. And like they brought this back in the 2014 movie.
Oh yeah,
because like Godzilla, he had like what 10 minutes of screen time if you add like all of his scenes up together.
It's like 14 minutes and like an almost two-hour movie, I think.
Yeah.
So, and that's what people complain about is Godzilla wasn't in the movie enough. But what's funny is there was more of him in that movie than there was of Godzilla in the original.
So yeah, that's so funny to me.
But I would also argue that the original movie has a much better story and meaning than New American. He's dead and he's going across the country, and Bryan Cranston dies immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man.
But yeah, and then Dr. Serizawa is kind of coerced to use his oxygen destroyer, which destroys all of the oxygen in a certain area and literally will like eat up the skin and anything, like kill anything within its vicinity. And at the climax of the movie is they find out where Godzilla is. He's like at the bottom of the ocean, kind of resting after all of his attacks. And so Dr. Serizawa is supposed to go down there, set it up, set off the charge, and kill him. But he, once he gets down, cuts his line, because he's in, like a scuba diving gear, cuts his line, and is basically, I'm going down with this because I never want anyone to find this, discover it, or use it again. So it's his first and only use of his creation. He sets it off, kills Godzilla, into the movie. So it's kind of a cautionary tale of man and it's his arrogance awakening something that they shouldn't have. And obviously all of the political themes and just emotional themes of Japan at that time and their feelings is encapsulated in that movie, and I think perfectly.
Yeah, and I gotta be honest, just like, it's honestly really sad to me. It's just like, I had no idea this movie had that level of depth to it. It's just like, it makes me angry with all the sequels now. Mm-hmm. Because, as a kid, you're watching those, like, oh my gosh, these are amazing.
Yeah.
Then, like, once you grow up, and someone like me who's went to dozens of film classes, like, the idea for the original film, it's so perfect. You know,
Yeah.
like all this source material and stuff it touches upon, you know, is amazing. It's like that's a perfectly crafted, good, like, you know, story, like it should be. Then everything else just didn't have that effort and life
Yep.
and meaning put into
Yeah.
it. Like the bet, like if you go back and watch all the most famous films from history, so many of them was it had a meaning to it. It was trying to tell you something.
Yep.
And so many films today don't do that. They just care about
How do we make money?
yeah, it's like how many explosions, destruction, and fights can we get
What
into
character can we bring back that's like 30 years old, but some old timers and new people will be interested in? And how can we make this a franchise with 7 spin-offs and 8 TV shows and let's make as much money as possible? And that's most filmmaking nowadays.
Yeah, like we'll occasionally get a hit with an important message, but that's one out of like 30-some films a year.
You kind of
know,
have to
like,
wade through the garbage to get like the hidden gem,
the hidden
good
gems.
movie.
Yeah.
But that's what I would like. You made a good point of how you're kind of disappointed after the first movie that most of them are just kind of they don't have that message. It's exactly that. How can we make money? How can we? Because Godzilla became a kind of kids mascot at a point. There was a point after a few movies. Not after like a few, after like the first 4 movies, literally the main characters were kids, and Godzilla was like a protector, and they were friends with Godzilla. And literally at one point, Godzilla's son literally like talked to the kid in one of the movies, the worst Godzilla movie, Godzilla Revenge, by far. Absolutely terrible. Like straight garbage. Like I've watched it once, biggest Godzilla fan ever. I don't think I'm ever going to watch it again. It is so, so bad.
What? Hey, question. Which one was it where he literally flies on his back? Which one was that?
Okay, now, I really like that movie. It's Godzilla versus Hedorah, or Godzilla versus the Smog Monster, which is like very anti-pollution and is actually really weird and trippy and psychedelic. So it's like during the 70s, there's a whole bunch of like psychedelic scenes in the movie that's very 70s. And it's super weird, and I really, really like it. But there is literally a scene where Godzilla grabs his tail, shoots his atomic breath, and then just starts flying. There's literally like hundreds of thousands of pound, like million-pound creature is just flying through the air, just like completely ridiculous and stupid.
Like, I remember being kids, and I think you were watching that one. I'm just like, little
What
me's
is
like,
this?
what is happening right now? How did we go from, you know, the original talking about, you know,
the effects of nuclear warfare and fallout, and then there's Godzilla flying through the air and going to save his best friend, this kid. Wow.
like what? Like, talk about losing the plot, you know?
Because that's like the trouble of talking to people about Godzilla is you're like, oh, so you're just kind of a nerd who likes these Godzilla movies, which, to be fair, I am, because I love so many Godzilla movies, and so many of them is just, here's this cool monster that Godzilla has to fight, and there's a giant Dragon Ball Z laser battle, and they just fight for like 50 minutes. I love those movies. Guilty pleasure. I will admit, 90% of those movies are not good filmmaking and good movies. I still love them. But I will fight to the death to talk about 1954, because if you actually talk to like history buffs and film buffs, Godzilla is brought up a lot. It is considered like a masterpiece for the time. And I will argue that fact with anyone. But all of the subsequent sequels and stuff like that, I'll be like, yeah, you're completely right about Godzilla. Except for that one movie. The other movie I will bring up is more recent. It's called Shin Gojira or Shin Godzilla. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Wait a minute. I think it came out in 2016, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I remember. You told me about that.
Yeah.
And I remember you were so excited because you were telling me, I came over to the house to visit, and you were telling me, like, dude, they kind of got the story back on track a little bit. But like, how so though?
So I would kind of compare it to some of the more recent, like where they reboot a series, but they go back to the roots, and people making the movie realize what makes the series tick and what makes it good and the meaning behind it, like Halloween 2018 or The Mandalorian,
or
where
Force Awakens,
or like with The Mandalorian, they went back. They're like, okay, problem with Star Wars is they just take the inspiration from the original Star Wars and just redo that again. With Mandalorian, they said we went back to the roots of what George Lucas had for inspiration originally to make A New Hope, which was samurai movies and westerns and different things like that. And so with Shin Gojira is the director Hideaki Anno, which is one of my favorite directors. He made Evangelion, same guy that made that. It's in my opinion, like a perfect reboot because as 1954 was a product of its time and talked about nuclear armament and the war and everything, the 2016 movie was about nuclear like mismanagement. So how we kind of like just dump the waste and are very like bad with how we take care of nuclear waste and things like that. And also, I don't know if you've heard of it, in 2011, I think it was, is the tsunami that hit Japan that just devastated like so much of the countryside and killed a lot of people. You've probably seen scenes of it. It's been all over the news for the time as there was just huge waves that would literally just like pick buildings up, take them, just pick up everything in its path and destroy boats you would just see in the middle of like the city because just this massive tsunami has hit it. So that happened in 2011. I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. But it was a very, very big event for Japan. And so a lot of the scenes in the movie of Shin Gojira are evocative of that. And there's scenes where like Godzilla comes on land and you see basically like a big tsunami and you see all these boats flying everywhere and stuff. And it's a lot of Japanese people said they kind of got PTSD from that because a lot of them went through that and had that happen to them. So in my opinion, it is a perfect reboot because it is taking the events that are integral for the country at the time, just like they did in 1954, but just doing it modern.
Like, dude, it's like history literally repeated itself in a way with this. It's like, okay, what's been our Godzilla, but this time we're changing the influence. This time it's influenced by that storm that hit us.
Yeah.
And like, it's so crazy to me. It's like history repeating itself, but in a good way.
Yeah.
So in this version, the 54 film never happened. It's literally its own thing.
It is actually the first film since the original that doesn't count the original. Every single film after 1954, besides the American version, every single Japanese film, even if they would like reboot it, like the 80s is the Heisei era, and they rebooted Godzilla, it still counted the first film. And then kind of like 2018 of Halloween took out everything else but the first film.
The first movie.
That's what every movie after 1954 did, is they always, at the very least, counted the first film. So Shin Gojira was the first movie that they were like, this is new. We are not counting the first one. So it was literally the first one in like 60 years that didn't count the original. So it was a big deal.
Yeah, and it's like, can you imagine making that decision? It's like 6 decades that film has always been mentioned. And now we're going to take probably one of the biggest risks of all time, be like, you know what? Doesn't exist in this universe. Like, and you're just like, are the fans going to like this or not? You know, because so many people hold the 54 film, so they hold it at such a big spotlight.
Yeah.
And for it to not be connected, you know, I'd be like, man, like, are they going to go see this or not?
Yeah, it was definitely a big risk, but it really worked out because I don't have the numbers and everything in front of me, but it broke tons of records. It was extremely popular in Japan. It was like one of the most popular movies in a very, very long time, and it is, since it's come out, like in Japan, they've nonstop talked about it, and it's been like, it was one of their like cultural, like when we have a movie come out that impacts like Infinity War, Endgame, that like everyone knows about it, everyone hears about it, that was one of those movies. Like everyone, even if you weren't a big Godzilla fan, everyone was going to the theaters like, you gotta see this new movie. Like everyone's talking about it.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because I remember when that movie came out, every time I would go on YouTube, literally, because my computer, you know how YouTube sometimes it gives you like, would you want to watch this?
Recommended.
Yeah. In my recommended section, I remember this. I kept seeing nonstop videos of people talking about the 2016 movie because back in 2016 when this thing came out, I was watching a lot of like film reviewer videos.
Yeah.
So like in my news feed, I kept getting video after video of people just doing nonstop reviews of that Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
It was everywhere. It was. I think for that whole year, it was just nonstop talked about.
Yeah.
All the time.
Because, like, if you are kind of a casual Godzilla fan and your complaints is most of them are just kind of throwaway and it's just another, like with the American ones, I really like the new American ones, but they don't have a lot of meaning. It's just amazing special effects. The best Godzilla has ever looked. This is like the big budget, kind of what I always wanted was huge, big budget Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is. And it does what it does extremely well. But it doesn't have that kind of like deep meaning and themes. And if you're looking for that, Shin Godzilla was that for people.
Was that? Okay.
Yeah. And like, I have a lot of good memories when I went to go see it in theaters. Because it came out, I think it was a few months later, so I think it might have been at like the start of 2017 when it was available in America.
Yeah.
Like subtitled and everything. It was one of the best theater experiences I've ever had. So I've been to, countless movies over the years with like completely full. This was the most like talkative and nice movie screening I've ever been to because like everyone that was there were big fans because like if you just go to like King of Monsters or whatever, you'll just have casual people, like Nancy from across the street, she might go and watch it.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
But she isn't invested. It's Godzilla. I know Godzilla's a big lizard that shoots fire, but everyone here was like mega fans because this was a subtitled Japanese movie. People go out of their way to go see this. You don't just like walk into this movie.
Yeah, I gotta be honest with you. I want to see more Japanese films in American theaters in the future. I've only seen one, and it was when we went to go see the subbed Fate Heaven's Feel Part 3.
Yep.
That's the only one I've seen subbed in the theater.
Well, lucky for you, talking about Hideaki Anno and Shin Godzilla. In December, the final Evangelion movie is coming to theaters.
Really?
We should definitely go see that when it comes out.
We should so do that.
I was actually planning when it was getting closer to it to like ask you about it because I was like, I know you're not. It's not as close to you as it is to me, but you like Evangelion.
Oh yeah.
And so this will be like the final movie, and it will be a big opportunity to actually be able to go to theaters and watch the final movie in theaters. Because we've seen it.
Yeah,
we watched it when it came out on Amazon.
Yeah.
But it's different to like be in theaters and have that sound system. I mean, that's why I love theaters so much. It's a different experience.
Yeah, and dude, I remember around the time this film was coming out, I think every time I came over to spend the night, you always gave me a mention like, dude, the movie is just a few months away from hitting American theaters. Like you were so excited about it,
Yeah.
and like you always talked about it, and I really wanted to get in on it too because you were really hyping it up for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I gotta check these films out. I'd be so down. Like, do you own the 2016 movie?
Oh yeah, I own all 36 movies. I own 2 out of the 3 TV shows because one of them is like mega expensive. There was the original Hanna-Barbera cartoon, which is you can only find the DVDs that are out of print, and they're like $100 for each DVD that has like a few episodes. And I'm like,
wow.
Maybe at some point when I have a lot of money saved up, I'll actually buy that because I'm that level of like a collector when it comes to Godzilla. But I basically own everything else Godzilla related. I have it.
Yeah, and I don't think I've seen, like, I think the only ones I've seen, like, I really want to see the 54 film now.
Yeah.
Because I would love to watch that and just see, like, with going in with the mindset you just gave me. Because I had no idea that this had that level of just, like, of heartbreak and sadness as the source material it's based off of. Because, like I told you, the only ones I've seen was like a couple of the 80s goofy ones.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious. I really want to see the ones that really had depth and feel to it.
Yeah. And I would say definitely worth your time. Like 100%. Like even like talking about like the tragedy and everything of it. Like even as a kid, you might not get as emotionally invested in movies and stuff like that. There's a particular scene which is iconic, is after Godzilla's like first attack and he destroys most of Tokyo, is they have this like singing scene where they have this like class of children sing in the memory of everyone that died, and it's like a montage of all these people in hospital beds with burns, and you see just the destruction and people lying in the street, and it's obviously evocative of in 1954, or not 1954, but 1945, when the bombs happened. A lot of these people that are in this theaters have seen that exact scene in real life. They would go to the hospital and have their friend, have their family with these radiation burns and stuff because they were like a little bit outside the blast. So even to this day, watching that scene and you hear this like choir of high school girls like singing this song and it's like very, very sad, I get emotional to it to this day. Even as a kid, I got emotionally like, wow, this is like really dark.
Yeah, like this happened like 50 years before we were even born,
Mhm.
you know, just crazy.
Crazy to think about.
Yeah, it really is. And yeah, I mean, like, I really want to go see this movie now. Curiosity, is the 54 film easy to find, to buy? Like,
now, not so much. So it used to be pretty readily available, but most of the time you're going to find the 1956 version with Raymond Burr. I haven't actually looked for a while because the most recent like release was this huge box set that's called the Showa era, which is from like the very first movie in 1954 to 1975, I think, which is like from the 50s to the 70s, all those movies, which is like 15 of the 36 Godzilla movies. And it came in a big box set for like $150. So they might have had a new release of Gojira. I'm not 100% certain on that. I know you can pretty easily find it to rent. So like $2-3. I think HBO had almost all of the Godzilla movies, all of those from the 50s to the 70s on HBO. Even some of them you can find for free on YouTube, subbed, because that's always a big thing. If you find a movie, Japanese movie free, it's almost always subbed because mainstream people, they'll pay because they're like, I'm not reading, I need to watch it in dub. So a lot of people will pay the extra few dollars to actually watch it dubbed. But a lot of the movies are literally just free on YouTube. So I don't think the actual Gojira is free on YouTube. I could be wrong. We can check later. But I don't think it's too hard to get a hold of. But, I mean, I own, like, 2 copies of it. So, obviously, if we don't watch it together, you can borrow it sometime or something like that.
Sure,
but, yeah, pretty
absolutely.
readily available.
Yeah, I got to check it out. And so, curiosity. So, I want to jump back to the suit effects or just one more thing.
Yeah.
So this movie, when they were making it, it invented that concept of the suit wearing? Or was that a thing already?
I am fairly certain they at least pioneered it. So there might have been an instance of like 1 or 2 movies that they had a guy in a suit. But when the word tokusatsu is used, it's usually used for kaiju movies, which is giant monster, guy in the suit playing the giant monster. And so Gojira was like the first movie to do that. So for the term tokusatsu, Gojira in essence was the first movie to do that. So it did kind of start that trend, start that period of movie making.
And they ended up using that suit effect, I think, all the way till like the early 90s, I think.
Until Shin Gojira, which was 2016, every single movie was suit effects.
Really?
There was the Roland Emmerich 1998 Godzilla movie, which was all CGI. Funny thing was, they actually made a suit of Zilla for that movie and were planning to use it, but they didn't really like how it looked on camera, so they ended up using only CGI.
Gotcha.
So every single Godzilla movie from Japan all had suits, literally from up until 2016. So there was movies from 2000, 2003, 2005. They were still using suits at that time. They had CGI creatures, CGI effects, still used the suit because it was like tied to Godzilla. So it's like you can't, for them, it was like, we can't take that away. That is what made Godzilla Godzilla. Obviously, when America did it, because 2014 kind of revived Godzilla, is in a big way because it was such a big success. So Japan was like, well, we need to come back. We need to bring Godzilla back for our audience. And so they're like, okay, we need to reboot it it's going to be the first time he's in CGI, completely revamp him. And even Godzilla in that movie, he has like forms. So he starts out as this kind of like larva snake looking thing, and then he transforms to this like T-Rex kind of with bug eyes, and then he has a third transformation where he's just absolutely gigantic. So way different than we've ever seen Godzilla. Godzilla is always just like this. He always looks the same. I mean, obviously he has changes throughout the movies to look different, but he's awakened. He's the same size. He doesn't like have all these super weird power-ups. So they just like completely revamped him and changed him for that movie.
Yeah, man, it's just so cool to me that it went that long with the suit effects and everything. It just shows you like how much this franchise meant to these people.
Yeah,
seriously. And yeah, and I think that's gonna wrap it up for today's episode.
All right.
And like, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Like, you have no idea how excited I've been to get you on here.
I've been excited too, and I'm like really glad that you honored me with allowing me to be on your podcast.
Well,
I'm glad, and I couldn't have picked a better topic. I mean, if you have like, all right, Jonathan, anything in your life, movie-wise, you want to talk about, it'd be either two major things. It'd be Godzilla or Star Wars. So you picked one of the two things that I can just splurge about for hours. So
Yeah.
if you wanted to have an 8-hour podcast, I'd have topics for the next 8 hours to talk about. So you kind of have to like, all right, cut it off. We can only have, people aren't going to be listening for a 10-hour podcast. Like, we have to cut it off at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's so funny. Like last year, right? I was joking around with him. It's like I was like, "Can you imagine if I had you on my podcast and we talked about Godzilla?" He replied to my comment. He's like, "Bro, that'd be like just 4 straight hours of me just going over every little detail."
And I remember you saying like, "I just have to sit back and let you make the content."
Yeah.
And I think that's about right. I talk the whole time, and you're just like, "Oh yeah, that's really interesting,
Yeah,
Jonathan."
I don't do anything. All right, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Just sit back and relax and let Jonathan just like talk gibberish for 2 hours.
But yeah, this is a dream come true for me. So yeah, this is episode 19 covering Godzilla 1954. This movie, like, I'm so hyped up right now. I'm so gonna have to check this out along with the 2016 reboot. And that marks the end of this episode. And I'm DJ Apollo.
And this is Jonathan.
And you're listening to the Tales of Music and Film.